3 poems that I included in the links and also in this document called Harlem and Heritage for the June 13th module. The document includes the poems Harlem Dancer by Claude McKay, Heritage by Gwendolyn Bennett, and Heritage by Countee Cullen. And what we see in all 3 of the poems, and the reason I selected them, is because they demonstrate particular issues during the Harlem Renaissance of African American artists who believe that they're modern and believe that they've broken away from the traditions of the past of enslavement and Jim Crow, but that always also struggle to have others consider them as fully American. And even in our first Langston Hughes poem, his Americanness kind of comes into question a little bit. So here first, the Harlem Dancer doesn't look like a lot of modernist poetry because he doesn't take apart the conventional poetic forms that some of his contemporaries like Ezra Pound might. But the breaking away from the past and breaking apart binary oppositions of people who are civilized and of a dominant culture versus cultures that were previously considered inferior and primitive is a modernist step to break apart and say, hey, that distinction between civilized and primitive or first world and third world isn't really valid. So I'll read the poem quite quickly. I believe this is a sonnet. Also, in modernism, not everybody was writing sonnets because that was a traditional form, but Claude McKay uses the traditional form of the sonnet in 1917 to make powerful comments on people of African American descent. So, the Harlem Dancer. Applauding youths laughed with young prostitutes and watched her perfect half-clothed body sway. Her voice was like the sound of blended flutes blown by black players upon a picnic day. She sang and danced on gracefully and calm, the light gauze hanging loose about her form. To me she seemed a proudly swaying palm, grown lovelier for passing through a storm. Upon her swarthy neck black, shiny curls luxuriant fell, and tossing coins in praise, the wine-flushed, bold-eyed boys, and even the girls, devoured her shape with eager, passionate gaze. But looking at her falsely smiling face, I knew herself was not in that strange place. So here we have a description by the speaker of the poem, who watches a beautiful black woman probably dancing in a Harlem nightclub. He comments on her beauty by saying that her voice was like blended flutes blown by black players upon a picnic day, and also comparing her to a palm, a tree that is more tropical in its origins. And swarthy, referencing her darker skin with the words luxuriant and shiny, brings the negative connotations of blackness into crisis, because here we see blackness with incredible beauty. The audience devours her shape with an eager, passionate gaze, referencing the hypersexualization of black men and women as primitive and exotic in the Harlem Renaissance era. And then in the final 2 lines, the speaker realizes that she's wearing a falsely smiling face, and that her real self, the proud black woman that he believes she is in real life, is not in that strange place, not there to perform for a white audience as a sexual being, perhaps. Gwendolyn Bennett's poem, Heritage, written in the same time period, also refers to palm trees, but this is a poem about hoping for a world where you can connect your heritage, your African roots, to a sense of home and belonging. So I will read it briefly. I want to see the slim palm trees pulling at the clouds with little pointed fingers. I want to see lithe Negro girls etched dark against the sky while sunset lingers. I want to hear the silent sand singing to the moon before the Sphinx still face. I want to hear the chanting around a heathen fire of a strange black race. I want to breathe the lotus flower sighing to the stars with tendrils drinking at the Nile. I want to feel the surging of my sad people's soul hidden by a minstrel smile. Here we have a poem of longing for background, origins, roots, kind of a longing to return to these idyllic African scenes with African references, including the Sphinx and the palm trees. Interestingly, like Wheatley, she uses the term heathen, which does not mean non-religious or have a bad connotation at all. It just means a religion different from Christianity, which was then and probably is now the dominant religion in the United States. And then she says, of a strange black race. So she's not fully familiar with people in Africa, but she wants to go, she wants to experience, and perhaps she wants to incorporate that past into who she is. But then in the last stanza, she talks about her people, African Americans, and I believe this stanza is quite powerful. I want to feel the surging of my sad people's soul. So here she's no longer in Africa, hidden by a minstrel smile. And the stereotypes that came up in the one in the PBS documentary previously that shaped perceptions of African Americans definitely go along with the minstrel tradition, which was a form of entertainment in which usually white people with cork blackened faces made fun of black people, made them enact the stereotypes and caricatures listed in the PBS documentary. Again, in terms of form, the rhyme scheme here is not necessarily completely modern, but it reflects on the past and then crashes kind of in the present with the reference to the minstrelsy of the United States as opposed to the things you see in Africa, the lotus, the Nile, etc. And Countee Cullen's poem, Heritage, also brings us to Africa. However, he breaks apart the idea that Africa is primitive or savage or bestial or not civilized by invoking all of these images of Africa in a positive context. Strong bronze men, regal black women. Meanwhile, the speaker is deeply frustrated and conflicted, trying to understand how to integrate the Africanness of his past and his heritage into the Americanness of his current life. He wants no song except the song sung by the wild barbaric birds, goading massive jungle herds, juggernauts of flesh the past, trampling tall defiant grass where young forest lovers lie, plighting troth beneath the sky. The imagery here is of wild barbaric birds, and I believe the massive jungle herds would be something like elephants, juggernauts of flesh. He's using a very distinguished, sophisticated language to describe the scenes in Africa. And even the young lovers are plighting troth. They are pledging their love to each other and planning to marry according to their own traditions and rituals. So even though we have a somewhat erotic image of lovers in Africa, they're not exotic and they're not hypersexual. They're lovers who are planning to marry, and it's an image of beauty. Nonetheless, the speaker of the poem struggles. So I lie who always hear, though I cram against my ear both my thumbs and keep them there, great drums throbbing through the air. It's an interesting way of talking about, although he resists his connection to his past, sticks his thumbs in his ears, tries to ignore it, he still hears those drums throbbing. So I lie whose font of pride, dear distress and joy allied is my somber flesh and skin with the dark blood dammed within like great pulsing tides of wine. Then I fear must burst the fine channels of the chafing net where they surge and foam and fret, referring to his dark blood, referring to the ways that his blackness gets marked as inferior in dominant American culture and his struggles with it. Then we have another reference to Africa with a question mark. The books about Africa in the historical moment were not positive. So a book one thumbs listlessly till summer comes. And we have lists here more of animals and a wild landscape in Africa rather than civilizations or humans with a heritage in Africa. Doff, let's see. So the monarch claws have leapt from the scabbards where they slept. Silver snakes once a year doff the lovely coats you wear. Yikes, snakeskin coats. They seek no covert in your fear, lest a mortal eye should see. What's your nakedness to me? So there are animals there, but they are concerned about humans. Here, no bodies, sleek and wet, dripping mingled rain and sweat, tread the 7 measures of jungle boys and girls in love. So we go from those lovers plighting troth to jungle boys and girls in love, which he says is not savage, is not there. That's not what's really happening. Last year's snow, last year's anything. There is no snow anywhere in Africa. Maybe at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. So he's going back and forth between his view of Africa in this first two stanzas, to a kind of book learning official view of Africa that contrasts with what he would like to see, what causes his conflict as African and American, because he is 3 centuries removed from the scenes his fathers loved. What is Africa to Countee Cullen or to the speaker of this poem? There is no peace, no release from the unremitted beat of the cruel and padded feet walking through my body's street. A lot of rhyme going on in here. And he's suffering because he's then made to perform for an audience, come and dance the lover's dance. It's the expectation, like in the Harlem Dancer, that blacks always perform and bring entertainment to white Americans. Then we have, again, the heathen gods. Quaint, outlandish heathen gods, black men fashion out of rods, clay, and brittle bits of stone in a likeness like their own. My conversion came high-priced. I belong to Jesus Christ, preacher of humility. Heathen gods are naught to me. This conflict between the African religious beliefs and social norms of his heritage and his conversion to Jesus, who is supposed to preach humility. And in order to be humble, he has to reject all other gods, of course, in Christianity. Jesus of the twice-turned cheek, Lamb of God, although I speak with my mouth thus, in my heart, do I play a double part? Ever at thy glowing altar must my heart grow sick and falter, wishing he I served were black, thinking then it would not lack precedent of pain to guide it. So he's thinking about his conversion to accept this Jesus who is humble, who accepts no other gods, particularly African gods, but he's kind of asking, how does the Jesus who was born in Jerusalem have blonde hair and blue eyes, like most of the images of Jesus you would have seen in that time period? He asks if he's a hypocrite because he wishes that he could see Jesus as a black man, not as a creation of white Christianity. And then at the end of the poem, he says, all day long and all night through, one thing only I must do, quench my pride and cool my blood, lest I perish in the flood. So he has to follow the program. He has to figure out how to integrate. But finally, he said, not yet has my heart or head in the least way realized they and I are civilized. And here is this flipping of the script saying, yes, I know I'm civilized. I'm a man of African descent. I've written this incredibly complex poem. But those white Christians are civilized too. similar to the way Phyllis Wheatley says, remember, Christians, Negroes, and Negroes black as Cain, you can all join the angelic train. It's kind of a way of reading the punctuation in the Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley is saying, white people can be Christian and black people can be Christian if you read her poem in a particular way. Similarly, Cullen is saying black people are civilized. I know this is my heritage. I have converted to Christianity. And later in his life, Cullen, or maybe it's McKay, one of them converts to Catholicism and becomes very spiritual. But black and white are both civilized, even though binary thinking tells us that white and European is civilized and superior. So, quick kind of run through of those poems for you. Please take your time to read and enjoy them, and let me know if you have questions.